Ellen Ashland goes into seclusion to heal after an attack leads her blind. Soon, though, she starts to feel paranoid and can't convince anyone that her attacker has come back to scare her by hiding in plain sight. At the beginning of the movie, a young girl is sad and all by herself. She then makes the choice to jump off the balcony of her apartment. Scenes change to show the same young woman named Helen a month earlier. One night, someone wearing a gas mask and pouring chemicals in her eyes beats her up badly in a parking lot. She is taken to the hospital right away. Soon, Omar, a nurse, comes to take off the bandages. As soon as the bandages come off, she learns she can't see. After that, a doctor named Katsuro comes into her room. He says that the poison she was exposed to burned, but did not damage her visual nerve. In plain English, the damage can't be fixed, and she is now totally blind. Ellen is upset and only slowly comes to terms with the fact that she will never see him again. Then, a police officer named Bryce comes and asks her about what happened. Detective Bryce asks her what she knows, and she tells him. A few minutes later, Ellen talks on the phone with her brother, who is in Tokyo. He tells her that he has set up a secret apartment close to the city center for her to live in, along with a guardian who helps people who are adjusting to their new lifestyles like her. The next morning, Ellen wakes up in her new flat and meets Clayton, who will look after her. Clayton says that it's because the drugs she's on are so strong that she doesn't remember the ride home from the hospital. Clayton tells her that he is a trained caregiver and will help Ellen with her daily tasks and help her adjust to being blind slowly. Every day at 11 a.m., he will go to her house and leave at 2 p.m. He also tells Ellen that she is now living in her new apartment on the 9th floor of the building and shows her how it is set up. Ellen tries to call her friend Sasha and her brother after Clayton leaves, but neither of them answers when she calls. She feels so alone because neither her family nor her friends are there for her during this hard time. The next day, Ellen sees that when she stands next to one of her windows, she can hear the noise from the busy street below, but when she stands next to another window, she can't hear anything. Clayton tells her that the glass is thicker there, so she won't hear anything. Then they both tell each other about their lives, and they slowly become close. Then Ellen asks Clayton if she can touch his face, and he says yes. That night, Ellen hears a woman crying while being hurt by someone, but it turned out that the crying sound came from the vent. The next day, she decides to call her neighbor for tea. She walks out into the hallway and puts a post-it note on the door of the apartment next door, asking the woman to join her for tea. That night, a woman named Lana comes to Ellen's house for tea by knocking on the door. She knows Ellen used to play the violin but lost her sight, but she acts strange. Even though she just met Ellen, she seems to know a lot about her. Ellen touches Lana's face and is surprised to feel a new scar there. Lana tells her that she shouldn't trust anyone. She quickly leaves the room. Ellen starts to believe that Lana's husband is hurting her physically. So Ellen goes to Detective Bryce and tells him that her neighbor's husband is hurting her. Officer Neiman is sent by Detective Bryce to talk to her friend and make sure that everything is okay. He finds out later that she is fine and that the scar was just a tattoo. The next day, when she wakes up, she sees something strange about the place. She tells Clayton that a car alarm goes off exactly every other day at 11 a.m., which is when Clayton comes to her house every day. The same time, the same car, and the same sound. Clayton doesn't care about the strange things and tells Ellen that it's a big city with lots of sounds. Ellen thinks Lana comes back into the flat later that night, but when she touches her shoulder, it's Lana's violent husband. He tells her to stop being crazy and leave his wife alone. Ellen feels scared, so she asks Clayton to come to her house right away. Clayton comes and makes her feel better. Clayton tells her at that time that he cares about her, but Ellen says she doesn't want a boyfriend right now because she needs a caregiver more than a lover. Clayton leaves the room because he is sad. As soon as Clayton leaves, the guy in the gas mask comes after her again. As the attacker puts a needle in Ellen's neck, she calls 911 before she passes out. Later, the rescuer tells her that she doesn't seem to be hurt and that there isn't a needle mark on her neck. When Detective Bryce comes in, he tells her that the CCTV also shows that Clayton is the only person who goes into the flat after him. When Ellen hears that, she feels upset and can no longer trust her own thoughts because she feels alone in her life and thinks someone is after her. Climb up to the rooftop fence and jump off. But Ellen doesn't die when she falls 6 feet. She is fine. She finds out quickly that she is in a room that blocks out noise, a room with no entrance. The sounds of the city are played through speakers in the room. A made-up city and a made-up high-rise. She quickly figures out that the apartment she was living in was fake and that all the noises she heard outside were coming from a sound system. She hears the car alarm go off at 11 a.m. and gets back into her apartment. After she gets back into her apartment, she checks out the hallway and finds that she can't get out. So she goes outside and knocks on Lana's door. Lana tells her that this is home and that she can't go anywhere else. Then Clayton comes to make Ellen's dinner. When they sit down to dinner, Clayton knocks twice on the table. Ellen knows this double tap knock and sees that everyone she's talked to since the attack has the same knock. Then she realizes that everyone she's met since waking up in the hospital was Clayton, including the nurse, the doctor, the police officer, the rescuer, and Lana's husband. Realizing this, she pretends to drop her drink and hits him on the head with the knife block. She takes his key and a taser right away and runs down the hall into the apartment next door. But it's actually a weird, empty storage room where Clayton keeps all his outfits and everything else he needs for this trick. Clayton has been pretending to be everyone else by wearing different clothes. Even more surprising, Ellen finds her attacker's outfit, which shows that Clayton was the one who attacked Ellen to make her blind, and then took her to this fake apartment to keep her captive. Then she finds Lana in a secret room. Lana is real. This is the fake hospital room where she was taken at the start of the movie. She tells Clayton that she is his sister and that she helped him take Ellen. Then she tells Ellen that the only way they can get out is through the secret vent in Clayton's room. Ellen is trying to get away, but Clayton catches up to her, knocks her out, and drags her into his room. Lana had already said that the only way out was through a vent in the wall in this room. Ellen feels the air coming out of the vent and realizes she still has a chance to get out. Clayton starts talking to himself about what he did. After his mother died when he was a child, his father locked him and his sister Lana in the basement and kept them there for 3 years. Clayton had only been able to stay alive by making up people in his head, giving them backstories and acting like them. But the music that Lana played for them in the attic was what really saved him. Ellen, a child genius who played the violin, made the music he heard. He calls her his light in the darkness. Now he wanted to be the same for her. As he tells her his story and why he did what he did, Ellen sees an opportunity to knock him out with the taser. She opens the vent, but it's too small for her to crawl through. Ellen finds a small bottle of the same thing that made her go blind taped inside the vent. When Clayton comes back, she sprays the stuff in his eyes, making him go blind as well. Lana gets there as Clayton is writhing in pain. When she sees that Clayton is hurt, she lets Ellen out into the real world. 6 months later, an excited crowd can be heard as Ellen gets ready to go on stage. Veronica Vanderhall, a 14-year-old high school girl, is rebellious and has a no-nonsense attitude. She disobeys instructors and parents and consistently receives poor marks. She receives a lecture from the principal about her poor grades and attitude. Veronica's inattention and clever behavior result in an indefinite suspension by the principal. Later, at home, Veronica attends another lecture from her parents. Veronica's father presents a flyer about Miss Genevieve's School for Difficult Girls, which targets girls with socially challenging tendencies. In other words, this institution excels at disciplining privileged females. Veronica reads the flyer and refuses to attend, but her parents convince her she has few options. The next day, they drive their daughter to Miss Genevieve's School for Difficult Girls. Miss Genevieve is the principal of the school. Additionally, all pupils have a strange hairdo, making them seem out of place. After meeting Veronica's parents, Miss Genevieve promises to discipline her and send her home after a few months. The speaker also claims to have straightened over 1,000 females throughout her reign. Despite their rebellion or arrogance, Miss Genevieve always finds a way to assist them. In the meantime, Veronica's mother questions why all the girls at school have the same haircut. Miss Genevieve explains that the hairstyle reflects their uniform, which represents simplicity, obedience, and honesty, with a frightening gaze. She believes that young minds are like sponges, and females arrive with negative habits. She only needs to squeeze them. Heather Corbett enters, and Miss Genevieve introduces her as Veronica's roommate. Heather first greets Mr. and Mrs. Vanderhall warmly, but then whispers something to Miss Genevieve. Miss Genevieve instructs Veronica to remove the gum, but she defies the order by placing it on a nearby pole. After Veronica's parents leave, Heather takes her to their room. The room is dim and has just 2 beds, a table, and an alarm clock. Heather offers to assist Veronica with unpacking, but is denied. Veronica chastises her for revealing it earlier. Heather is asked to stop the behavior since their scary principal is no longer there. To her amazement, Heather says she is obeying the regulations and will continue to do so until they enter the school grounds. Veronica, puzzled by her conduct, relaxes by listening to music on her MP3 speaker, but Heather intervenes again. She abruptly switches off the speaker and informs Veronica that music is prohibited. Before departing, she mentions that Mr. Welch would soon give her a new haircut. The following morning, Veronica is woken up at 5 a.m. by both the alarm clock and Heather. While still tired, she dresses in her school uniform and travels to the canteen, where the girls are eating breakfast and chatting. The unusual thing is that none of them are yelling or laughing like typical girls their age. They seem dull and lifeless, like robots. Veronica visits the counter for meals, but discovers only sausage and bacon are available. She must now adapt her vegan lifestyle. The scene shifts to a male history teacher, David, recalling prior instances of youngsters disobeying their parents and facing consequences. It seems that all courses at this institution aim to instill obedience and politeness in kids. Veronica disputes David's claim. A whole class is stunned since this is the first time someone has contradicted their instructor. However, David reassures them that Veronica will soon become nice. He asks her why she hasn't had a haircut before class concludes. Soon later, Miss Genevieve calls Veronica to her office while she is exploring the playground. Upon arriving there, she finds Mr. Welch, the barber, waiting for her. The barber unexpectedly takes measurements and asks her age, which is not necessary for a haircut. After recording the facts, Mr. Welch informs us that he cannot schedule a haircut appointment until the following week due to his busy schedule. Upon Miss Genevieve's request, he cancels one appointment and promises Veronica a haircut the next day. At this time, Veronica understands that something is amiss with the school. At midnight, as her roommate sleeps, she packs her possessions and prepares to leave school. However, Claire, a fellow student, stops her as she exits the main entrance, demonstrating that escaping is difficult. Several guards watch the road, and electric barriers surround the school. After introducing themselves, Claire leads Veronica to her room. She presents illustrations of two past pupils who attempted escape but were apprehended. Even though they calculated all guard motions, they were captured. Claire informs Veronica that she has little time since her haircut is planned for the following day. She alleges that the haircut turns pupils into monotonous robots. As Veronica is clearly bewildered, Claire shows her something. After following a hidden passage, they arrive at a chamber with Miss Genevieve, Mr. Welch, and another pupil. The pupil is tied to a chair and requests to be freed, but Miss Genevieve remains unaffected. She assures her youngster that they will become polite soon. She tells Dr. Welch, the barber, to start. He gives the tied-up pupil a bizarre helmet and a haircut while she cries in horror. Her hairdo and demeanor vary throughout time. Within minutes, the girl went from being defiant and unpleasant to calm and courteous. Veronica and Claire, observing remotely, finally grasp the pupil's alignment. Claire shares that she cracked her skull as a youngster and required a metal plate for protection. This plate prevented her from becoming a boring student after a haircut last year. Claire explains her reason for not escaping later in the conversation. She and her sister arrived at school on the same day, but only she remained sane. If she goes alone, she worries Miss Genevieve may hurt her sister. Upon hearing this, Veronica swears to devise a solution to free the pupils from the enchantment. In the canteen the next morning, she encourages pupils to whistle, but is admonished by Miss Genevieve. During their talk, Veronica accidentally admits that she and Claire watched a fellow student's haircut. This angers Miss Genevieve, who pledges to improve Veronica in the evening. Several hours later, Veronica panics and goes to her only friend Claire's room, only to discover a new hairstyle. After Veronica accidentally disclosed their surveillance on Mr. Welch, Miss Genevieve provided Claire with a haircut and removed the metal plate from her skull. She now lacks feeling and is bland like other classmates. This ends Veronica's lone chance of leaving the awful school. Later, she waits in bed for Miss Genevieve to take her away. Heather, her roommate, enters and suggests they go for dinner. Veronica is grumpy. Instead, she recalls her youth, when she was content and unconcerned about the world. She inquires about the monotony and control of life, but Heather doesn't comprehend her words. Despite this, Veronica gives her roommate a goodbye present. As she delivers Heather her MP3 speaker, Heather remains dumbfounded. In the background, static sounds suggest Heather is recalling old experiences. Suddenly, she clicks a speaker button, triggering a pop tune. Heather first experiences tremendous agony in her ears due to the music, but eventually calms down. Interestingly, she has restored her sanity and recollections from before the haircut. She has no recollection of how she ended up at this institution. Veronica is thrilled to have discovered a remedy for the ailing pupils. Without delay, play, she begins planning with Heather. After some time, she visits Miss Genevieve's office and requests a haircut. As they approach Mr. Welch's barbershop, Veronica becomes irritable and insults Miss Genevieve. During this moment, she alerts her roommate to start their plan. Heather, present in Miss Genevieve's office, places the MP3 speaker near a microphone. After turning on the speaker, the same pop music as before blasts from all school announcement devices. At first, the music powerfully affects all pupils, but they quickly reveal their true selves. Claire reunites with her sister in the canteen after a year. In the closing scene, the girls come out on the playground, yelling and having fun like typical teens. Miss Genevieve fails to get them back into their rooms. Now that the enchantment is gone, the girls are free and carefree. Veronica, Heather, and Claire race towards the school exit gate as the movie concludes. This girl is trapped in a house with an invisible man, but instantly enjoys it when Gabby, who accompanies a movie director named Dan to his abandoned riverside house in a rural city of England. Due to his busy schedule, Dan has to return back to London, leaving Gabby behind with the assurance that he will return in a few days. Before departing, though, he hands her some movie scripts and asks her to read it through, suggesting she could be a unique case of a model turning into an actor. Despite her initial reluctance to stay alone, Dan somehow manages to persuade her. After he leaves, Gabby begins to unpack her belongings and arrange it in order. During this, she hears a door creak, startling her for a moment. She dismisses the sound and proceeds to read the scripts. A short while later, Gabby hears a knock on the door, so she goes to answer it. It's a delivery boy named Heishi, who recognizes her as a supermodel and expresses his admiration. Unfortunately, Gabby doesn't show much interest in the conversation and quickly shuts the door. Later, she looks at her aging face in the mirror, which makes her feel sad. It appears that she uses several skincare products to retain glow on her face. At night, Gabby has a dream in which she imagines someone entering her bedroom and spying on her. A couple of days later, Anne returns and inquires about Gabby's thoughts on the scripts. She admits her difficulty in understanding them and instead expresses her desire to do a modeling show with a renowned designer named Max Balagan. Dan, however, discourages her from returning to modeling as she has already retired from it. During their conversation, he also asks about Gabby's experience in the house. She goes on to say that she feels a strange vibe and also a sense of being watched, as if the house has a life of its own. Dan is amused when she talks about spirits and dismisses the topic. He heads off to London. Gabby walks back to the living room where she stumbles. Believing that Dan wrote it, she hurries outside to stop him and inquire why he left such a message. In response, Dan assumes she's joking and dismisses her concerns. He says that he didn't write the note. Following this, Gabby goes back into the house, but her fear intensifies upon discovering another note that reads, "I am not your enemy." In a panicked state, she rushes out of the house and attempts to contact Dan, but her calls go unanswered. Left with no alternative, she summons JC and asks him to inspect the house. JC conducts a thorough search of the entire premises, but finds nothing amiss. Shortly after, Dan also arrives, but he thinks she's playing some kind of game. This infuriates Gabby. Dan calls his girlfriend, Nina, and tells her that he will be staying home for a night. Later in the evening, he takes Gabby to dinner to help her divert her mind, but ends up getting drunk. When they return home, they play some chasing game around the house and end up getting intimate with each other. After making out, Gabby tells him that she is aware of the reason why he drives back to London every night. In response, Dan admits it, but he claims that Nina isn't a good lover like Gabby. As their conversation unfolds, Gabby shares about her first love, Jimmy, whom she met when she was 15. According to her, Jimmy had a skin condition and wasn't that appealing. Despite this, she made love with him one night, and they spent the entire night on the beach. The following morning, he dropped her home on his moped. On the way back, he met with a brutal accident that claimed his life. Regardless of his death, Gabby says she still feels his spirit watching over her. Around midnight, Gabby wakes up to find Dan has already left. Alone in her bed, she hears the door creak and witnesses a chair moving on its own. Moments later, a man with a female wig and painted nails suddenly appears in front of her, causing her to scream in terror. In the morning, Gabby awakens to find Dan putting on his clothes. This leads her to wonder whether the vision she experienced earlier was a dream. Dan asks her to get ready if she wants to return back to London, but Gabby decides to stay. After he leaves, Gabby makes her way down to the basement, where she discovers an ancient typewriter and a wardrobe. Sensing a presence of someone in the house, she attempts to communicate with it using handwritten notes, posing questions like, "Can you see me? Are you dead? And do I know you?" In the next scene, we see Gabby putting on her makeup and wearing a beautiful dress. While looking at herself in the mirror, she also talks to an unseen individual, addressing it as Jimmy and speaking without fear. In the midst of the chit-chat, Gabby expresses that she has fulfilled her aspirations now that her glory days have passed and none of the scripts scripts seem suitable, she believes it's time to explore something new. Later that night, Gaby watches an interview with Max Balagan on TV and learns about his upcoming private event where he plans to select a few lucky people for his show. Excited, she shares this news with the invisible presence of Jimmy, expressing her intention to attend the event. At midnight, Gaby is in her sleep and she is woken up by the drunk JC and his companion, Mickey. JC suggests that they leave, claiming that it isn't the right thing to do. But his friend insists that Gaby is the key to helping him fulfill his dream of becoming a fashion designer. A few moments later, Gaby opens the door and invites the two friends inside. She seductively sits on the couch and asks JC to turn on some music. Mickey interprets this as a hint for intimacy and begins to kiss her and touch her body. However, she quickly pushes him away. Mickey then tells her about JC's dream and asks Gaby to assist him in connecting with the right people. However, Gaby cautions JC to reconsider this career path. Mickey asks JC to leave so that he can have a private time with Gaby. Innocently, JC departs and Mickey proceeds to force himself towards her. Gaby attempts to resist, but Mickey resorts to violence, slapping her forcefully and commanding her compliance. Feeling helpless, she breaks down in tears and calls out Jimmy's name. As soon as she says so, an invisible entity intervenes, pulling Mickey away from Gaby and throwing him to the floor. Confused, Mickey throws some random punches in the air, but the invisible force subdues him and pins him to a table as a form of retribution. After a brutal assault, Mickey is eventually allowed to escape. The next morning, Gaby returns to the house after a walk by the river. She starts getting ready for Max Balagan's event and asks the invisible Jimmy to accompany her as well. Amidst this, she lights a cigarette and soon after, the unseen presence blows the smoke back into her face. After witnessing this, Gaby attempts to reach out and touch the invisible Jimmy, but she fails. She then questions Jimmy about why he doesn't want her to touch him, but receives no response. Changing the subject, Gaby decides to serve Jimmy a freshly brewed coffee. She leaves the coffee to brew and turns to retrieve 2 cups. As she turns back, the invisible entity unexpectedly splashes hot coffee onto her, causing a severe burn on half of her face. As a result, Gaby collapses to the floor in agony, clutching her face and crying out in pain. We see Gaby, who has bandaged her face, is peacefully asleep in her bedroom. A few moments later, her phone begins to ring, stirring her awake. Caller is Dan, but Gaby chooses to ignore the call. Alongside the phone's ring, she also hears the distinct sound of typing coming from the basement. Intrigued, she follows the sound, but as soon as she reaches the basement, typing noise abruptly stops. This time, she proceeds toward an old wardrobe and opens it. Inside, she finds a collection of dusty coats and the same blonde wig that the mysterious man wore in her earlier dream. In addition, she comes across a yellow box filled with numerous pictures of the man from her dream. These discoveries send shivers down her spine, causing her to drop everything to the floor. Just then, she notices a man in the mirror and screams. Gaby anxiously attempts to escape. The invisible figure seizes her and pins her onto a table. He then proceeds to force himself against her will. Dan becomes concerned when Gaby doesn't answer any of his calls, so he decides to check on her. Upon arriving, he is shocked to see her in her brutally battered state and inquires about how it happened. Gaby, in a crying voice, points towards the pictures and informs him that the man had been in the house the entire time. Dan heads to the basement to investigate but finds no trace of the man. Returning to Gaby, he reveals that the man in the pictures is Michael Gidges, a once famous actor from 15 years ago who often portrayed feminine roles. Dan explains that Michael's career took a nosedive at one point, which forced him to sell all of his properties in order to settle his debts. Since then, the man disappeared without a trace. After a brief conversation, Dan checks on Gaby's burned face and urges her to seek medical attention. At that very moment, the invisible Michael unexpectedly strikes Dan on the head from behind, knocking him out. Michael then covers Gaby's face with his hand, rendering her unconscious. After some time, Gaby gradually regains consciousness and sees Michael visibly seated on a chair nearby. He firstly apologizes to her for breaking her trust by impersonating Jimmy. He then explains that he has been invisible for so many years that he's now uncertain whether he's truly alive or merely an abstract concept. He goes on to share that his life story resembles that of Gaby's because he was also once a famous figure like her, but experienced a turning point from where he faded into obscurity. Furthermore, he reveals a golden ring on his finger, which possesses the power to render anyone invisible. He admits to having misused this ring for evil purposes, causing harm and chaos in people's lives. However, he eventually felt guilty for his deeds and sought refuge in this house, where he began writing scripts as a means to overcome his guilt. Nevertheless, his evil tendencies resurfaced when he saw Gaby. Now, Michael believes he can attain true peace only only by relinquishing his power. As a result, he offers the ring to Gabby, urging her to use it as a blessing, unlike what he did. Despite hearing Michael's story, Gabby remains convinced that he is a figment of her dream and will vanish when she awakens. In order to persuade her otherwise, Michael asks her to read his scripts. It turns out that he has written everything about Gabby ever since she came to this house. As Gabby goes through it, she learns that there is no ending. Michael explains that the conclusion of the story, including his own fate, is in her hands now. With all this in mind, Gabby takes Dan's car and drives away. Several days later, Dan is seen giving a house tour to Michael, who intends to buy his property back. During their interaction, Dan notices a picture of Gabby and wonders where she has gone. Meanwhile, Gabby is with her lover, Jimmy, on the beach, possibly due to a form of time travel. This time, she asks Jimmy to stay at her place to avert the tragic accident. The movie ends as the couple rides away, with Gabby wearing the super powerful golden ring. Click subscribe for more videos like this, and click another video to enjoy another best movie explained in less time.